This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
It's official. We're now children of O'Corn. Yeah, I went there. I'm sorry. Michigan Podcast is next.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Cook. Waits for it. Yes, caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific. Throws it and touchdown Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Second. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again.
Go Blue, welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. I am Steve Days. Thank you for joining us. I want to thank our friends and partners at Detroit Sports Podcast who help us to get the word out about what we do here each and every week. All of you that subscribe to us right here on YouTube, if you haven't yet, please do. I try to respond to as many of the comments each week as I possibly can. We get a lot of them. We really appreciate that. Click like on the video if you dig what we do. Help us to get the word out. You're the best marketing we have is your word of mouth amongst the Maize and Blue faithful all over the country. You can also be one of our subscribers on iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher as well. And hey, if you get a moment, we would really appreciate it. Put a good positive review of Michigan Podcast on one of those podcasting platforms. That helps us to promote what we're doing here as well. And if you don't like what we're doing, hey, we respect that. That's cool. Just don't put out there a negative review because it would hurt our feelings. We have really, really shallow self-esteem. Also want to thank our supporters through Patreon who help to make it possible for us to do this each and every week. If you want to support us on our Patreon page, any support you could provide is appreciated. But we also throw you a couple of exclusives each week, including my exclusive Michigan game prediction and predictions for all the big games in college football, as well as our exclusive post-game instant reaction podcast that we do for our Patreon subscribers each and every week as well. And finally, of course, you can follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. We went over 1,000 followers this week. Greatly appreciate that. Coming up later on this week's episode, a lot of quarterback talk. So why not get an expert? John Wangler, former Michigan quarterback, he's been in a quarterback competition. Let's not say controversy. It's kind of a nasty word. He's been in a quarterback competition that raged well into a season. He's been a guy that lost his job because of injury and then had to fight his way back. In other words, he's been exactly where both Wilton Speight and John O'Corn find themselves today. So who better to talk about the quarterback position at Michigan than some guy who's had to be the quarterback at Michigan and battle through adversity to get there and get back there again. John Wangler will join us. That and more coming up today on Michigan Podcast. But we begin with the big news. Coach Harbaugh making it official at his weekly press conference on Monday. Wilton Speight will be out for, quote, multiple weeks. They've not said the specific injury that he has, although it's obvious it's somewhere in the neck injury. And in this day and age, that's not anything we should be playing around with. So we're going to make sure, obviously, he's 100% ready to go before he comes back. So what's multiple weeks mean? Does it mean 2? Does it mean 4? Does it mean 6? Does it mean the rest of the season? We're only a game away or 2 here from being halfway through the season already, if you can believe that. All right, so whatever multiple weeks means, it means it's not going to be in the very near future, which means right now it is John O'Korn's team. Now, it likely would have been John O'Korn's team this week anyway, even if it wasn't going to be multiple weeks from Wilton Speight, but mainly because of the way that O'Korn played. Probably they would have said to Speight, hey, take another week, let's make sure you're ready to go. And let's see if John O'Korn, if what he did against Purdue in that second half, if that's what he's going to bring to the table, because if he is, that greatly improves the offense. But now that it's multiple weeks, it is O'Korn's team. We need him now to be the man. And to me, I think that's 3 questions that John O'Korn has to answer, and the Michigan coaches have to answer for this team to compete, contend, and maybe even win a Big Ten championship, something Michigan hasn't done in football. Can you believe it? Since 2004, the second longest title drought in the history of the Michigan football program. Question number 1, is O'Korn what we call a gamer? Because I have to believe, I know some of you have told me in the last week, Steve, I just think Harbaugh's loyal to Wilton Speight because given the way O'Korn played, there's just no way that he wasn't playing like that in practice. Sometimes I wonder if we don't even know our own coach. This is the guy who took a quarterback who took his team to the playoffs the year before. When he got hurt, put Colin Kaepernick in, totally changing the offense from what they ran under Alex Smith. And when Alex Smith came back, kept Colin Kaepernick in, making a risky move that paid off all the way to 1 inch away from winning a Super Bowl. If you're doing that in the National Football League, which stands for not for long, if you take gambles like that and they blow up in your face, I don't know why you wouldn't do this with nearly eternal job security at the University of Michigan. If John O'Korn was playing that much better than Wilton Speight in practice all this time, based on Coach Harbaugh's track record, I am metaphysically certain they would have made a switch. Something tells me the Michigan coaches were somewhat surprised by the way John O'Korn played. Now, sometimes guys are just gamers. Although remember, we put John O'Korn in against Florida when Speight threw the back-to-back pick sixes, and O'Korn didn't do enough in his one drive to merit playing again. That's what has me worried, is I want to believe, yes, Fox Mulder, I want to believe what we saw from O'Korn in the second half is John O'Korn. I don't want to believe it's an outlier, but right now, until proven otherwise, and Saturday night he gets to prove otherwise, until that happens, it is an outlier. Until it happens, it's just as possible that O'Korn felt extra motivated and focused by the fact that the offensive coordinator on the other sideline at Purdue, Tony Levine, is who benched him when he was at Houston, when he was the head coach there. That could be why he played that way. Now, let's hope if it is, this wasn't a 1-week occurrence, but maybe it kind of set him off, that this was what he needed to get him going again. This is still a young man that, as a true freshman quarterback, threw 28 touchdown passes. Do you know how many quarterbacks at Michigan have thrown 28 touchdown passes in a season? Do you know? I'll give you a hint. It's a really low number. 0. No quarterback at Michigan has ever thrown 28 touchdown passes in a season. John O'Korn did that as a freshman, so there's talent and ability there somewhere. We just hadn't seen it yet in a game until against Purdue in the second half when we needed it the most. Let's hope that's not a one-off. Maybe John O'Korn may be just one of those guys. Some guys, they just bring it more in games than they do in practices, which leads me to question number 2. Has O'Korn shown the playmaking ability in practice this week we saw against Purdue? Because he had to know he was good at, even if we didn't know at that point in time, coming off the field at West Lafayette, the severity of Wilton Speight's injury, he had to know the likelihood was high. He would at least start the next week against Michigan State. So let's hope he brought it in practice. Let's hope we saw in practice these last 2 weeks what we saw in the second half against Purdue, because that's the player we thought we were getting when he transferred in here, and we had just not seen it. In 2 years at Michigan, we've not seen anything close to that, actually. Hopefully we saw it in practice this week, which would go a long way to proving that it wasn't an outlier. It wasn't a one-off. It wasn't lightning in a bottle. Which brings us to the third and final question. Have the players rallied to John O'Korn? You know, one of the things we're going to talk to John Wangler about in a few minutes is you go back and look at his history as a player. And Wangler was having the game of his life against North Carolina in the Gator Bowl in 1979. until this guy, maybe you heard of him, named Lawrence Taylor, came off the edge and nearly ended his career. And there was a lot of talk that maybe Wangler wouldn't play again, ever. He kept fighting, kept battling. Bo let him come back for a 5th year. And eventually, in the middle of his senior year in 1980, they put him in the game against Northwestern. Schembechler calls the offensive line over and says, hey, it's your job to make sure no one lays a glove on this guy. It's your job to make sure he doesn't get hurt again. There is some not so flattering footage percolating in social media of Michigan running backs, I guess we'll call it attempting, in air quotes, to pass block. Now, I never played college football, but I know in high school they didn't teach us the chicken wing blocking method. Okay, I think when you chicken wing somebody, that's followed with the phrase "ole." All right, 3 weeks in a row, we saw teams confuse our offensive line and our blocking assignments with pre-snap blitzing. And eventually, your quarterback gets hit that many times, he's going to get hurt. And that's what happened to Wilton Speight. I really hope the Michigan coaches have let the point be made and stressed. You've already cost us one quarterback. You cost us another, you may cost us the season. So whatever was going on the previous few weeks, whatever communication wasn't happening, whatever techniques were not taking place, that's amateur hour. That has to end now because stuff gets real now. You have to play. This is a unit, and the running backs in pass pro as well, has to play remarkably better than what they've shown so far this season. You know, every week when we put this graphic up, I almost miss the cue because that court is freaking sweet. And if you want something like that in your yard, you want that to be your actual court, Sport Court of Michigan has you covered. From basketball to tennis to batting cages to hoops, if you need anything athletic in your backyard, give Sports Court a call. Based out of Michigan and ready to install your court sooner than you might expect. Now, if you are in the Southeast Michigan area or in Ann Arbor, Tim Barnes will personally walk you through the process of having your dreams of a professional court in your backyard. Just visit their website, Sport Court MI, that's MI for Michigan, sportcourtmi.com. Now, if you're outside of Southeast Michigan and you need a hoop in your driveway, they've got you covered there as well, anywhere in the country. MonsterHoops.com is that website. MonsterHoops.com, they'll ship that right to your door. And if you mention Michigan Podcast to MonsterHoops.com, you could get up to $100 off of a Monster Hoop. Plus, if you mention Michigan Podcast to SportCourtMI.com, you could save up to $1,000 on your backyard game court by mentioning Michigan Podcast to SportCourtMI.com. So MonsterHoops.com, SportCourtMI.com, and tell them Michigan Podcast sent you. Well, of course, a lot of the focus right now for the Wolverines is on the quarterback position. And our guest this week on the Michigan Podcast is just about the perfect person to speak to that focus because he's been in this position himself. John Wangler, the man who quarterbacked Bo Schembechler's Wolverines to Bo's first Rose Bowl victory, joins us now on Michigan Podcast. And, John, we are really thrilled and honored you're with us, brother. Go Blue, how are you?
Hey, thanks for having me, Steve. Appreciate you guys having me on, and look forward to this game on Saturday night.
So, John, I want to begin with your own background, your time as a player. Now, I came in as a Michigan fan. My first full season, my family moved me to Michigan when I was 10 years old in 1983. So, I'd watched a little of you guys and Anthony Carter in a Rose Bowl, prior to that. But the first team I really knew intimately was the 83 team with Rick Rogers and Steve Smith and those guys. So if I don't quite have my history right, go ahead and correct me. But if I know my history, you and a guy named B.J. Dickey kind of battled for that quarterback spot when you first came to Ann Arbor, correct?
We did. We both backed up Rick Leach for a few years there, and then in 1979, B.J. and I both battled for the spot. B.J. was more of an option quarterback. I was more of a running, scrambling, throwing type quarterback, and so we were back and forth. Bo actually would start one of us one game, play a quarter, and rotate the next quarter, and back and forth. And then by the middle of the season, I ended up taking over, and then finished up the 79 season, and then I got hurt in the Gator Bowl, and then came back for my 5th year in 80, and they were concerned about my knee, so I didn't start the first game or the second game, and I came in at the end in the first game against Northwestern, and then the second game against Notre Dame in the second quarter we were losing, and then Bo put me in, and then I finished it up that season, went all the way through.
So when we look at this dynamic now between Wilton Speight and John O'Korn, given the history that you just recited to us, you've literally been on every side of this. You've been the challenger, you've been the starter, you've been the starter who got injured, and then had to worry, am I going to lose my job to injury? Can I even come back? In your case, it was a knee, and we weren't necessarily as certain with knee surgeries back in your day as we are nowadays. Now with Wilton Speight, we think it's a neck, although we're not sure, but given what we saw on the field, we think that's what it is, and obviously there's a lot of well-meaning and well-deserved heightened sensitivity when we get into the neck or head area and where those injuries occur and how long to keep players out. So I would guess you've got a lot of empathy for both of these guys. You've been in both of the situations they now find themselves in.
Yeah, I really have. Even going further back, my freshman year, I was on the demonstration team, and so I really kind of came up the hard way and have seen that, from every different angle, the competition for the spot. Unfortunately, when you're trying to be the quarterback in Michigan, there's only one quarterback, and only one guy gets to play at a time, and it's a very coveted position, and once you get that, you don't want to let it go. And but the thing is, you really, even if you're the second guy, you're really a play away. So I always try to prepare as if I was the starter, whether I was the 4th string or the 2nd string or the 1st string. I always tried to prepare like I was the starter, so that when I got in there and got my opportunity, maybe my opportunity would be one quarter, maybe it would be one series, maybe it would be one play. I wanted to make sure I was ready and make the most of it. And so I think both of those guys have the mindset. John O'Korn was the starter as a freshman, had a great season, and he didn't play much for the last 4 years, and now he's getting his opportunity. He started a game last year against Indiana, but I think now he'll have a chance to settle in and have some weeks to prepare as the starter until Wilton gets back, and then at that point there'll be a decision that has to be made. But I think either one of them are capable and will do a good job at that position. I think with John, his ability to move and extend the play and his escapability, coupled with his ability to throw, I think will be a plus, because our offensive line, we've had some concerns and some leakage over the first few games, and we got to protect the quarterback better, we got to run the ball better, and I think John will give us a good opportunity to do that, and our line will develop, and I think our backs will block better, and it's a work in progress, but everyone would like to see our offense a little bit more prolific, and I think it will be.
John Wangler is our guest on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. When we hear about leadership with the quarterback position, that's something that we as fans are aware of. I don't know, though, unless you've been on a team at this level, you can truly quantify whether it's overinflated or whether even all the focus that's on it, if it's still even understated. When you went through a battle with a team, with a quarterback, and you and B.J. Dickey, at times you guys are interchangeable, how do you command a huddle? How do you command a team? Or is that not as big of a deal as we in the media or the fans make it out to be, John?
Well, I think, like BJ and I are still great friends, and we had very, and Rich Hewlett was battling in there too. We had very healthy competition. Look, we all wanted the job. We all knew it wasn't, going to be our decision. It was going to be Coach Bo's decision, and so I think we all supported each other and wanted each other to be at their best to compete for that job. And I think, as far as the leadership factor, I think that was really, you got to be yourself, and you can't fool players. Players are the smartest guys. It's like your kids, right? You can't pull the wool over their eyes. They know when you're phony and when you're sincere. Mm-hmm. So I think the ability to be that way with your teammates, and it starts as a freshman, right? They see who's working hard, who's, doing the extra, going, getting there early, leaving late, more time in the summer, preparing, watching film. They know who's putting in the time. And all that goes into leadership. It's as much of those little things. And then when you get in the huddle, I don't think you have to, you don't have to be a guy yelling at people. I don't even remember if I ever yelled at any of my teammates. They all had great respect for me and knew what I went through to get there, and they were going to go through a brick wall for me. And I think that's really, it's as much by your actions and the way you carry yourself, and the fact that they can count on you because they've seen you, in every different situation. And that's one of the great things about football is that you're really stripped down to naked, and they know who's going to react under pressure well, who's not going to react under pressure well, who's a front runner, who's a cheerleader, who's a guy who they can count on in the foxhole. And that's the position you want to get to with your teammates, where they know that if they got you taking the ball from center, they always got a chance to win and get that first down and get a touchdown. And it's not as easy as people think. And leadership is I don't think it can be overstated, because I think that's, there's a lot of guys with great arms and great, running ability and great physical tools who don't end up being great quarterbacks. And whether it's leadership or whether it's, the mental process or whatever that may be, there's a lot of intangibles that go into that position. And that's why there's more mistakes made at the quarterback position drafting to the NFL than any other position, because it's very hard to evaluate leadership, your vision, your toughness, all those things. You can see if a guy is 6'6" and 240, can run a 4.5 and has a great arm. That's all really visible, but that doesn't necessarily translate to being a good quarterback. And I think leadership is the one thing, and toughness and smarts. All those things are intangibles that define and separate. You look at Tom Brady. I mean, he's the perfect example, right? He's got a good arm. It's above average. He's not very mobile, but I mean, he's off the chart on every other thing, and he's a winner. And those guys will go through a brick wall for him. So there's a lot of factors that go into play in that position. Leadership, in my opinion, is probably right up there is one of the top.
I've read Bo's autobiography so many times growing up. Obviously, you have a prominent place in there with the team that you were on and breaking the Rose Bowl curse that people thought Schembechler had at the time. And he talks about in his book, you were having maybe the game of your life in that Gator Bowl against North Carolina. You run smack dab into Lawrence Taylor, and that's where the injury occurs. As you mentioned, people weren't sure you were going to be able to come back. And Bo, there's a scene in Bo's book where he talks about where they're going to put you in the game for the first time, that game at Northwestern you mentioned, and he calls the offensive lineman aside and he says, listen, it's up to you guys to make sure no one lays a hand on our quarterback, that he doesn't get hurt again. And I thought about that in relation to, there is some, I'm sure you've seen it, you've had kids play on the team, you have a son playing on the team now. There's are they both still playing still? Okay. There's some not too flattering footage on social media of Michigan running backs, I guess we'll be kind and call it attempting to pass block. I didn't play college football, but they didn't teach us the chicken wing method in high school. Okay. And now we got a quarterback that's hurt. You'd think that maybe Coach Harbaugh and Coach Drevno and some of those, and Coach Hamilton and the offensive coaches have taken some offensive linemen aside and say, hey, we just lost one quarterback. We just can't let that happen again. This is on you guys. You have to protect our quarterback, because one thing we know under Mark D'Antonio, it's going to be zero gap blitzing almost the entire game. They've run the same defense at us 10 years running. We're going to see it again on Saturday, John.
Well, yeah, we have a great coaching staff. I think that's one of the real pluses that Jimmy's done, is brought together some great coaches. The linemen know that their job is to, protect the quarterback, to open up the holes, and to, really, your team, the strength of any team is your offensive line. If your offensive line doesn't perform, it's very hard to run and pass and be successful offensively. So I think, they've been preaching that from day one. But it's a process, right? And they're not where they want to be yet. But, they will come together. I think the backs, that's one of the things that's always been a hallmark of Michigan backs. Is, you're not going to get the football unless you block. So I do think, Jay, the running backs coach, has been preaching that, obviously. It's no one's fault. It could be a blitz, whether it's this guy, that guy, it's a scheme. They call the right defense. There's a lot of factors that go into it. So I wouldn't point the finger at any one thing, but I would say they have to play better. The offensive line has to play better. The back's got to block better, right? I mean, for us to be the kind of team that we want to be, we have to step our game up. Defensively, we played great coming out of the chute these first 4 games. Offense has lagged behind. Typically, that's the way it goes during the season. Defense is usually ahead of the offense. But now is the time, especially when you're playing Michigan State, our interstate rival, who has a big chip on their shoulder, who would like nothing more than to knock us off and make their season and start the big turnaround. It's very, very critical, right, that this offense comes to play Saturday night and that we move the ball and that we dominate the line of scrimmage. The one thing we've struggled with over the last couple of years is be able to close out games and dominate, picking up first downs in the fourth quarter to end the football game. And we have to be able to do that to be a great football team.
John Wangler, former Michigan quarterback, our guest on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. John, let me consult your expertise with what I like to call fan questions. And what I mean by that, things that we as fans, if we're knowledgeable about the game and we watch a lot of it, we notice, but we don't necessarily know why it happened or what the remedy is. But we know enough about the game from watching it closely to notice when it happens. And there's one of each of these with both Wilton Speight and John O'Korn. Let me start with Wilton Speight. You want to, when you had a disappointing spring game, you want to say, well, it's just a spring game. On the other hand, you want to also point out that a lot of times that's an environment where you are set up to be successful. Now, I watched probably 30 spring games on television around the country this year. I can promise you, we were the only spring game I saw where our quarterback was facing blitz packages. I didn't see this in the other 29 spring games. Okay, so I think that had something to do with Speight's performance, but there's no question we didn't see the same guy. I've watched, again, on the Big Ten Network, the Maryland game at the end of the season from last year, where you saw a guy seeing the field. You saw why he was third team all Big Ten. We had not really seen that in the 3 games plus that he played before getting hurt against Purdue. The natural assumption of fans is that a guy gets better with every year. When that doesn't instantly happen, John, can you help us, having been there, what's the reason for that? And when that natural progression doesn't take place, do certain guys' talent level just tap out, or is it something else?
Well, Steve, I'm not ready to say that if you're referring to Wilton in the spring game, I'm not ready to say that he reached his peak or anything like that. I agree with you, which was kind of surprising to me, that he saw the amount of blitz packages that he did in the spring game. There's a lot of holes we were filling on the offensive line. We were breaking in a bunch of new receivers. So there's some factors that are going on. It's not just the quarterback. The easy thing is to point at the quarterback, right? We get too much credit. We get too much praise. I mean, that's just kind of how it goes. But I think Wilton has got better. I don't think this year has been an indication. He's made some good throws. He's made some bad throws. I'm not ready at all. I think he's the same guy, and he's more experienced. And I think, had he not gotten hurt, I think he would have been fine, and we would be fine with him. And I think John O'Korn is going to do a good job. But I don't believe that you've seen the ceiling for Wilton Speight. I think he's a good quarterback. You got to understand one thing about him. He started off his collegiate career throwing an interception. He bounced back, and then he had a great run there. Ohio State, he had adversity. He bounced back, put us in a position to win. So he is resilient. He's a tough kid, and he fights. He's a fighter. He's a competitor. I don't have any problem with him, and I think he will develop. You got to understand, you got a lot of freshman receivers out there, and you got a young offensive line. So some of these things you're seeing, and you got some young backs who are two of the main guys are still sophomores. So, there are some factors. So let's not just, say, hey, he may have tapped out or not. I don't believe that. I think he's got a bright future, and he's got to get healthy, obviously. And then I think John O'Korn will do a nice job when he's in there. He had a good spring. The competition was very close in the fall. So I think that position is well manned, and I believe, obviously that position is key for us to make a run at the title. And I believe that whoever's in that spot is going to do a good job the rest of the year. We have talent around them, albeit some young talent, some inexperienced talent. But as the year goes on, those kids are going to get more snaps, and we're going to continue to improve offensively.
Mentioning O'Korn, we saw in his start against Indiana last year, and I'm not sure what we can read into that because, I mean, we had an active snow event, at that game. That was one of the worst snow accumulation games at Michigan Stadium in the last couple of decades, and so the conditions weren't that great. But we did see him kind of bail out of the pocket if the immediate read wasn't there. And then we saw a little bit of that when he came in against Florida. Had the one nice throw up the sideline to Tariq Black, but we saw more of a guy that was anxious to get out of the pocket when he felt pressure. And then suddenly against Purdue 2 Saturdays ago, the guy just owns the pocket. If anything, he might have been staying there too long and then making incredible athletic plays to get out of the rush, make pinpoint accurate throws on the run. We saw the opposite with him. If fans are wondering, hey, what's happened in the last year to Wilton Speight, people are wondering what's just happened in the last couple of weeks to John O'Korn. Can guys really just sort of get it like that, John? Because I think fans are worried that might be a one-off. What do you think?
No, I think it's a maturation process with John O'Korn. I think that was always kind of the I don't know if you'd say it's a criticism, right? I mean, the fact that he has the ability to escape and extend plays, it's a good thing. I mean, if you bail too quick, it's not a good thing. But I think it's a process. It's a credit to his coaching and for him to learn and mature that, maybe you need to hang around in there a little longer and let the play develop and step up or climb the pocket or whatever you're going to do to extend the play before you put the ball down and tuck it and run. So I think it's really a maturation process, and I think you'll see that what you saw against Purdue going forward. I think you'll see more of that than the opposite.
Finally, offensive line play. We've seen this, the example we've seen in the NFL, for example, was David Carr, who came out with every measurable from Fresno State. It was like, God Almighty had created a quarterback out of a cauldron, and David Carr spit out. But we saw a guy get hit like 90 times his rookie year in the NFL for an expansion team, and he just never really recovered, never came close to reaching his potential. Can that happen to a quarterback? Can if you were facing the consistent pressure that Wilton's been under the last few games, for example, how much does that rattle the confidence of a quarterback? And could this be everybody, I think a lot of Michigan fans are like, well, maybe it's a blessing in disguise. We don't want our guy getting hurt, but O'Korn played well. Could this actually be a blessing in disguise for Wilton Speight? If he can recover fully from whatever the actual injury is, this gives him a few weeks, some time away, maybe from not feeling the rush every single snap. Give that offensive line some time as well. Might this benefit him to take a bit of a break, if you know what I'm saying?
That's an interesting perspective, Steve. Yeah, I think it can, because if you consistently have your internal clock, on tilt because of the pressure that's coming so quickly, you start to anticipate pressure when it's not there, and you start to get rid of the ball and do things, that are unnatural. The greatest defense and the biggest way to frustrate a quarterback is to continue to, hurry him and make him not be able to set his feet and not be comfortable in the pocket. And to your point, it may be good for him to let him heal, take a step back and be able to reset and refocus, so that when he is healthy, you'll be able to come out fresh and not have that muscle memory of being hurried so much these first 4 weeks.
Well, I would caution Michigan fans, if you know your Michigan football history, there is a legacy of quarterbacks, usually because of injury that or benching, that fans have a tendency to move on and we think we're done. I mean, your injury, we've already cited that at the top of the interview. John Wangler, that's your history. I go back to, Demetrius Brown threw 7 interceptions in a game against Michigan State in 1987, gets benched for Michael Taylor. Michael Taylor gets hurt at the end of the next year. Demetrius Brown comes back to become the second quarterback to take Bo to a Rose Bowl victory. Elvis Gerbach got hurt. Todd Collins comes in, does great. Gerbach comes back, ends up leading that team to a Rose Bowl victory. So, John, there has been a legacy of quarterbacks that the Michigan fan base has decided, well, we've kind of just moved on from them. These guys have, and you're a living history of this, brother. You guys have a tendency to come back and live to fight another day. We've seen this before.
Yeah, we really have. And that's why I really caution everybody. You need 3 quarterbacks minimally. You look what's going on at Maryland, right? They lost their first 2 quarterbacks, and you can go down in 1 second, 1 play, and you got to have guys who are ready to step in there and play. We've seen it the other way, where we've had situations where guys weren't ready to play, and it was disastrous. So I would not close the book on Wilton Speight by any stretch. And even if John comes in and plays great and he continues to play out, who knows down the road where you're going to need Wilton to step back in this season, or who knows, he could come back for a fifth year. I mean, there's a lot of factors. So, he's got a lot of football left in him. And, you have to give – if there's one thing about him that I have the highest respect for is his resilience. I mean, he's been knocked down. He's made some colossal mistakes, and he's bounced back and never quit fighting. And that's really the hallmark of probably all the great Michigan quarterbacks. They've always been competitive. They're battlers. They're tough. And they're never going to say die. And, I think that's the situation that we have with those two guys. And you got a young Brandon Peters who's sitting there in the wings. And so they're developing. And look, if there's any guy who knows how to develop a quarterback and coach that position, it's Jim Harbaugh. So I think between him and Pep Hamilton, these guys are in good hands, and their confidence will be where it has to be when they get that opportunity to play again.
Heck, I didn't even mention, when it wasn't too long ago, Tate Forcier was going to be the new hotness. Beats out Denard Robinson, who goes on to become one of, statistically, the most exciting and incredible players to ever wear the winged helmet. So that's another example. So, John, what are you doing now? I know you have your own clothing line called Valiant. I know you have your own apparel company there in Royal Oak that you're the CEO of. Tell our audience, what are you doing now?
Well, I work with Adidas, and I handle the Midwest for our licensed products for Adidas, and we also have our Valiant clothing line. And, we work with some of my sons and a couple of guys on the team, kind of growing that, teaching them the business world and the entrepreneurship. So I do that, and I do some broadcasting on Fox for the high school state championship games, and just try to be a dad to 6 kids. And we have a store in Royal Oak called Company 512, a sportswear store that my wife Lorraine runs. And it keeps me pretty busy, chasing the kids around and trying to sell some T-shirts and hats every now and then.
Is there a website our audience can check out if they want to see what you guys are bringing to the table there with that Valiant clothing line?
Yeah, valiantbrand.com. You can go and see any of the Valiant clothing, and then all our Michigan Valiant clothing you can get at MDEN. And MDEN does a great job, selling stuff, and we're going to have
I have spent the gross domestic product of a small Latin American country at the MDEN over the years, John. Yes.
They're a great company. Scott Hirth and his family have had it for years. That was the first account I ever called on in the apparel business in 1986, and it's been great to see their success. And they're such true blue Michigan fans and family, and they do a great job. And if you need anything Michigan, you go to MDEN, and I'm sure they have it. If they don't have it, they'll find it for you. That's the kind of people they are.
Well, John, it was an honor to have you with us here today, offering your expertise here on Michigan Podcast. And obviously, you have a tremendous legacy that so many Michigan fans celebrate from back in the day. And we're just honored that you were with us today, man. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate you having me on. And, I really look forward to seeing this game on Saturday. It's going to be a great rivalry. It doesn't matter, obviously, the cliche of you can throw out the scores. It's going to be one of those, yards a yard, and it's going to be fun to watch and see how we respond. And I look forward to us really showing up big on both sides of the ball and making a statement, showing everybody that we are going to be a contender for the titles.
John Wangler, former Michigan quarterback, our guest here on Michigan Podcast. We'll be back with more in a moment. And now this week's Big Ten Power Rankings, as I, here, Steve Dace at Michigan Podcast, would rank the teams. Rutgers and Illinois, congratulations. You are who we thought you were. You have clearly separated yourselves as the worst of the pack. Indiana comes in at number 12, but I think Indiana, Minnesota, Nebraska, and I'd throw Northwestern in there as well. I think you could just, that to me, those teams are Yahtzee. Just put their 4 team logos as dice in a cup, shake it up, and different numbers may come up, but it's the same 4 teams over and over again. Although Mike Riley found out this week that he is a better coach than what they have at Rutgers and Illinois. Those are his 2 wins in the Big Ten, so there's something, I guess. I've got Purdue coming in next at number 8. They've got a big one against Minnesota at home on Saturday. That's one of those games, if you're the Boilermakers, you want to get bowl eligible, you have to win that game. Iowa drops a couple of spots after their loss to Sparty, who moves up to number 6. in my Big Ten power ratings. Yes, don't forget, I know they lost to Notre Dame, and that score sounded like and looked like it was one-sided, but they had 5 turnovers in that game. They put up over 500 yards. Do not take them lightly. Plus, even if you agree with me that the program at Michigan State has taken a step back, and it clearly has, well, even Michigan State coaches nowhere near as good as Mark D'Antonio had their teams play their asses off against Michigan. So you should know we are going to get, do not underestimate them, we're going to get Sparty's best shot on Saturday night. They're going to treat this like a national championship game for them. My top 5 teams in the Big Ten this week, at number 5, I've got Maryland with a huge road win at Minnesota, and I know they're saying their third-string quarterback, but if you consider Caleb Henderson, who a lot of people thought was going to be the starter, the transfer from North Carolina, he got hurt in training camp. The player that won, the guy whose name I can't even say it, the guy who won the game for Maryland at Minnesota at quarterback actually started camp as their 4th-string guy. So DJ Durkin, he can still coach football. My top 4 in the Big Ten, just as the bottom 2 have separated themselves, I think these top 4 have separated themselves as well. And I know this is a familiar refrain with me, but nothing's really changed. I think Penn State's number 1 until somebody knocks them off. And then you can put number 2 whoever you want. Michigan, Ohio State, and Wisconsin. I have Michigan number 2 because I think the Michigan defense is the best unit that any of those 3 bring to the table. And then there's one other reason now. We're a third of the way through the season. One Big Ten team has a win against a team currently ranked. In the entire conference, guys, 1. You know who it is? It's Michigan with their win over Florida. That's the only win over a ranked team, that at least a team that is currently ranked, anyone in this conference has at the moment. And we're a third of the way through the season. That's a yo. Speaking of rankings, if I had a vote in the AP poll, this is the ballot I would have submitted this week. South Florida would creep in, West Virginia, Louisville, Utah, Central Florida. Scott Frost is going to be your new hotness. He's this year's Tom Herman coaching candidate with the way they're playing. They just laid it down against Maryland, blew them out, blew out Memphis, who a lot of people thought was the best group of 5 team after their victory over UCLA. So Scott Frost, he getting paid here in a couple of months, yo. Rest of my top 25, Miami moves in at number 20. NC State, which hosts Louisville on Thursday night this week. Florida has LSU coming to the Swamp. San Diego State I have as the highest-ranked group of 5 team right now because of their 2 wins over the Pac-12. Virginia Tech slides to 16. Oklahoma State at 15 after surviving Texas Tech. I've got Ohio State and Wisconsin at 13 and 14. They haven't beaten anybody, guys. Anybody. I mean, Wisconsin's best win is at BYU. This might be the worst BYU team in like 50 years. The teams Ohio State has beaten have a combined 1 win against a Power 5 team. They have beaten nobodies. Now, I think those teams are pretty good, but we got to see them actually play somebody. Continuing through the top 25, Washington, this is why I only have them at 12. Their best win is against Colorado on the road. They're okay. That's better than anybody Ohio State or Wisconsin has beaten, but they're not as good as Colorado was a year ago. This is why I have Notre Dame and Auburn higher. I think their strengths of schedules have been better. That's why I didn't drop USC all that much. Their strength of schedule better. Michigan I have at number 8. Washington State slides in at number 7 because I think their win over USC is a better win than any of the teams behind them has. TCU I have at number 6 because I think their win over Oklahoma State, particularly on the road, is better than any win any of the teams behind them have. Which brings us to my top 5 this week. Penn State at number 5, Oklahoma at number 4, Georgia at number 3. That road win at Notre Dame. You know, at the time when we had to come back to beat Colorado, and a lot of us last year were kind of like despondent, like maybe we're not that good. Then at the end of the year, when the college football playoff rankings were coming out, that was like why we were ranked number 2 or number 3 every week. And even when we lost to Iowa, we only fell 1 spot because that win turned out to be a lot better than we thought. The Notre Dame win in South Bend for Georgia is starting to look like that for the Dogs now. Plus, they just delivered Tennessee its worst home beatdown shutout loss since 1923. 1923. That's like the Harding administration, like a century ago. And my number 1 and 2 teams, I think Clemson's number 1 until somebody beats them. They've done something now no team has done in the history of the AP poll. They have 3 wins over teams that were ranked in the top 15 in the first month of the season. No one has done that. Since the AP poll debuted in 1936, that's never happened before. And that's why I think they're number 1. To be the man, you have to beat the man. And then finally, if I had a Heisman ballot that I had to submit this week, in your Heisman ballot, you only submit a top 3. Saquon Barkley is number 1 with a bullet. Baker Mayfield is number 2. But Bryce Love now from Stanford moves into number 3. He has 1,000 yards this season rushing on fewer than 100 carries. So I know Saquon Barkley is getting a lot of the Barry Sanders comparisons, but 1,000 yards on fewer than 100 carries, as Bryce Love has, that's Barry Sanders territory there. More in a moment. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you who should start at quarterback for Michigan against Michigan State. Now, obviously, this poll finished before the news came out on Monday, but I think this gives you a pretty good read on the pulse of the fan base even before we got the news that Speight was going to be out for, quote, multiple weeks. 81% of you. Is that a lot? Yeah, that's a lot. 81% of you, even before hearing the news that Speight was going to be out for multiple weeks, thought John O'Korn should start no matter what. So I think that speaks to the impression he left in the second half against Purdue. Again, let's hope that's not a one-off. Let's hope that's not, hey, let me show up my former coach. But that's a sign that a guy has had a breakthrough, because that's going to probably determine the trajectory of the season from this point forward. Our question of the week comes from Nathan Scott, who says, why doesn't the FBI just come out with everything they have now in the college basketball scandal? What makes you think they have not, actually? I think what you're watching in this college basketball scandal, this is classic racketeering and RICO case prosecution. They're waiting for other people to flip on other people, and they will. I mean, these assistant coaches are not hardened criminals. You know, these aren't mob guys that go to the clink because, you know, they've been there before. They know they can do the time. They did 5 years in juvie. They did 8 years for carjacking. So this is nothing new to them. These are guys in wingtips. These are guys who are trying to figure out, you know, what level of car do I rent when I'm on the road? What can I truly put on my expense report? These guys aren't going to prison, man. They are going to rat everybody out. So I think we have heard everything that they have so far, and I think that's why they put the hotline out there. I think that's why they're squeezing these guys, is they know there's more out there, and they are looking for it. That's going to put a wrap on this week's Michigan podcast. Don't forget to join us each week here on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. Support us via Patreon as well. We'll see you next week. Go Blue.